Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenegar, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. My guest today is John Buford, who is a leadership guy like me, and like our shared friendship with Sean Georges, who you will have seen with John in an early version of the podcast that we filmed last year as we celebrated the publication of their book on mission. We'll touch on that later. And you will also note that Sean and I had a conversation that also is going to be appearing closely tied to John and I's conversation today. So we're going to have some interesting conversation. And welcome, John, and thank you for taking some time out to be with me.
Thank you, Ed. It's my pleasure. I look forward to talking to you again. We had a great time last time.
So. Yes, we did. And so tell everybody a little bit about your history and who you are and what you're doing now.
Great. I, of course, grew up with Sean in a small Midwestern town and did, sports in a small town thing. And right out of high school, I enlisted in the Marine Corps and went to college. I figured out a way to do that. My family wanted me to go to college, and I wanted to join the Marine Corps, so I tried to keep everybody happy. So I figured out how to do both of them. So I went to college and joined the reserves. And then while I was in college, I kind of accidentally fell into a Marine officer commissioning program and ended up going in the Marine Corps right out of college. Got commissioned as a second lieutenant. Spent 20 years in the Marine Corps, the bulk of which kind of two sides of that. A lot of time overseas, obviously, as Marines do, deployed overseas doing operations. But a unique piece of my career in the military was when I was in the States, just happenstance, I guess. I ended up teaching at the officer academies, officer candidate school, and the basic school where all the newly commissioned officers go, and then the kind of each level at the captain and then the majors level. So I ended up teaching at schools, teaching tactics and strategy, but a lot of leadership development. And so I was fortunate to have a really good grounding in not only the physical practice of leadership in the Marines, but also exposure, kind of the academic angle on leadership, and did a lot of reading. Retired from the Marines about 20 years ago, and jumped into a new career as an outdoor leader for Outward Bound. And Outward Bound is an adventure education program that takes people out in the wilderness and does various activities. And then concurrent with that, earned my doctorate and ended up by happenstance teaching undergraduate students at a small liberal arts college. And it was a really unique program. It was an outdoor leadership program called Wilderness Leadership and Experiential Education, but it was a really neat laboratory to help develop young people's leadership, confidence, and competence in real situations. The great thing about education is it has kind of low consequence. So you're in kind of a laboratory where you can experiment with things without, making fatal errors as you can in the corporate world. But also the wilderness outdoor portion, it did have some real consequences. And so there was a real need for quality leadership, and really had a great opportunity to find my own voice as a leadership trainer and developer of leaders. Don't really consider myself an academic, although that was in my job description. I really looked at myself as more as a leadership development person. So I did that for 11 years and retired from that a few years ago. And now I've really kind of jumped in with both feet. Community service. I'm in the Rotary Club and lead a number of activities, fundraisers, and that, and on a board of several boards of nonprofits, and then continue to be an Outward Bound instructor while I'm young enough to do so, physically able to do so. And then, of course, Sean and I, which you've talked about, we'll talk about more, decided to publish this book on mission because we thought we had a lot to say. We'll leave the judgment up to your audience whether it's worth it, but we thought we had a lot of good things to say. And so we published this book and started doing some consulting and coaching and some programs revolved around that. So that's where I am at this point in my life. It's been a great ride and really feel honored. Yeah.
That's really great. And I respect a lot of the work that you've done. Let's just, round it off to 40 years of doing leadership development. And that's a 40 years of dramatic change in our world. And as I mentioned to you before we went on the air, I thought what we might discuss is kind of your perception of what leadership has been in those generations. And we talked about, okay, there's young people and there's people in the Middle Ages, and there's people like us who have kind of reached what is perceived as the end of our career. But there's also this expanse, and I've had the same 40 years of doing leadership work, and of seeing how that the conception of what that is has changed dramatically as well. So all those things are kind of pieces of this that I'm really interested in having a conversation with you about, because I think the people who are watching are going to be interested in this, because it's like, we're kind of like the mechanics at the car shop who know how to work on a car, and they know how to do the stuff that other people don't know how to do. And I think people perceive us as being knowing how to do things that maybe we do and maybe we don't. But at least let's have a talk about this. So let's start this with young people, young generations. I have a interest in, particularly in Generation Z, young men and women, and let's talk about what you see as the need for how we develop them to be leaders of the world that is emerging. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's interesting. I have read about these generational seams that we're so aware of now, that we talk about Gen X, Gen Y, millennials, and it's very interesting. There's much truth to it. I think, not to be idealistic or Pollyannish about it, but in what wants to come out of my mouth is, good leadership is good leadership. And I think that I hear a lot of people, including myself sometimes, kind of roll our eyes and say, kids nowadays. But I look back at my, sainted grandfathers who were both World War II veterans that looked at me when I was 16 years old with hair falling out over my collar and probably not living up to what they expected. Were probably rolling their eyes saying, kids nowadays. And so I'm very sensitive when I think about that. I try to keep myself grounded in thinking that, the eternal question that we all should ask ourselves is, what's my best and highest role of this person right now? How can I help this person, regardless of their behaviors, regardless of their generation, where they are at, or the social environment that they're living in, their reality? How can I help them move forward to find their voice as a leader? And so I always try to not be the futzy old guy that rolls his eyes at the younger generation, because I think that there are some real, you can look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs or any of the models. There's some just basic things that people need and want. That you as a mentor and a leader and a teacher can help create an environment for them to prosper and grow. I look back at my own journey and the things I did as a kid. I also on the other side, helped other people move their way through. I was in Boy Scouts and obviously the Marine Corps, which are um, very structured environments to develop leaders. People, there's a hierarchy, there's roles, you move up in rank, you're given more responsibility for more people. And so those are really great. Not all people have access to those things, but those are really great opportunities to develop your vocabulary and your behaviors and what's right and what's wrong, and learn those basic leadership principles that move people to accomplish a mission. What was interesting is after I left, obviously Boy Scouts, and I left the Marine Corps, a lot of that structure went away. Sean loves to tell a story. I'll steal from him, where he had an old sergeant major also retired, call him up after about 2 years that he was out of the Marine Corps and said, "Sir, nobody's in charge out here," which is something you find out when you get in the civilian world and you start leading nonprofits and volunteers, and you realize the leadership principles remain, but it's a different type of leadership.
Yeah, yeah. I find that I think that's a really important point to make, is that the structures that exist don't always provide order, and I think Boy Scouts and military service, there's not just structure, there's order to that structure. And that order is there because there's something at stake.
Mhm.
In a real sense, there's a lot lives are at stake. You go out on a 5-day hike, a 50-miler hike with the Boy Scouts, and if you're like doing what we did with our scout troop, we hiked along the ridge up there on the Mountain to Sea Trail up there near Mount Pisgah.
Right.
And
Mhm.
it was dangerous. There were points where it was really we had to be really careful because some of that trail, and it was raining the entire time. And so creating order, which is basically responsibility, but in relationships to one another, I think was really key. And so I keep coming back to the need for order, not just structure, but for order to the structure.
Right. And when I left the Marines, I'm kind of throwing the Marines in young adulthood, although I was squarely middle aged when I left, and came out to the civilian world when I went to teaching undergraduates in a liberal arts college, and then also in Outward Bound. There's literally no hierarchy, no structure, right? So you have undergraduate students, everybody is a tuition payer, everybody is a seat filler. Fortunately, in our program, it wasn't just an academic program; it was also a leadership program. But you had to set those structures, not necessarily a chain of command hierarchy, but the structure of what what do leaders do, what do followers do, how does that differ from just observers, right? So many of these undergraduate students, um, you know, 18, 19, 20 years old, they'd been, most of them, the lion's share of them had been observers their whole life. And maybe some of them were really good followers, but very few had, not their fault, they're young people, had not had experience looking at themselves as a leader and taking leadership responsibilities. And so that was a real, I think, important waypoint. And that is an important waypoint in a young person's life, to realize that they're not just an observer or a passenger, but they're also have responsibility as a follower to their team, and then leadership responsibilities to their team, right? So kind of from an observer to a follower to an individual contributor to a leader. So I think that's a real important progression and stepping stone approach to take to help people move along.
Now, did some of these students discover that they had a capacity for leadership that had never shown up before in their previous life?
Sure, absolutely. Just to give you a visual picture, we in our program we would have a cohort of students, 10 students, and one professor, for example, myself, and we would spend a whole semester together They didn't take any other classes, but they would, we would work on technical outdoor skills, all the things climbing and whitewater, canoeing and kayaking and backpacking, those type of things, develop those individual skills. And the students would be assigned leader of the week throughout the semester. So, for example, you would be leader of the week this week, I would be leader of the week next week. And that was a big stretch for a lot of these students. When I talk to young people, a lot of times their perception of leadership is something that people do to others. And one of the convincing arguments I had to make was leadership isn't something you impose on others. It's a service to others. It's something you do for others.
Yeah.
And so they'd be put in a leadership position and they would be hesitant because they felt they didn't know more than anybody else. They weren't smarter than anybody else. They didn't want to come off as being bossy. And so that was a real paradigm shift for those folks to understand that leadership is a service to others, that leadership is needed on a team, and everything was focused on the team, which is what Sean and I emphasized in the book, because that's the context in which you lead in a team, 2 or more people with a common mission. And I'll never forget, I'll just give one quick vignette. We were on a very challenging hike with this cohort of students, and I had a young woman who was leader of the day or leader of the week. And we had done multiple, I think 10 or 11 river crossings, and it was February. And so everybody was cold, everybody was wet, borderline hypothermic, and we finally get to camp. And of course, everybody just wants to plop down and get themselves warm. And this young woman looked at me and said, "Okay, what do I do now?" Because of course, I'm overall responsible because I'm the faculty member that's responsible, but she's the mock leader of the day. And I think that what I said to her was probably the best thing that I could have said to her is, I have no idea. What do they need? And I could see the wheels turning in her head where there was no school book solution. There was no answer. She had to ask herself, what do my followers need? How can I best serve them? And she did wonderful. She did all the things. She said, you go get firewood, you set up the tents, you 3 go change your socks and get warm, and we'll meet back and tend to all the things that a good leader should do.
Oh, that takes me back. I've had many of those kind of experiences with scouts and then personally in educational settings. So that's very gratifying. It's to see in that moment that young woman's life change, because she gained some perception about herself and what she can do that she didn't know, and sitting in a classroom, you don't really get to have that kind of perception brought to you, but getting out there on the woods and on the trail, and when you're cold and you're wet and you're hungry and you're hyperthermic and maybe you're a little delusional and all of those things. Yeah, it's yeah.
And that that can be used as just as a adjunct or placeholder for the corporate world. It's not, this doesn't have to be out in the wilderness to happen, right? Like a young person can be on a team, and whether it's budgets or resources or time and things are sideways.
Right.
And I always think the 3 things that maybe not consciously that go through my mind is, first of all, I need to model good leadership behaviors. Like I need to model the way for folks to the best of my ability. And then I need to empower them, right? Nobody's going to learn to lead by just watching you. They'll pick up some tips, but you need to empower them. So you need to give them real responsibility and trust them to act, give them the resources and the authority to do what they need to do. And then, so it's leading from the front and then stepping into a supportive or a delegative role, and then stepping into a supportive role. Then you step back and mentor and let them make mistakes and make good decisions and be there as a safety net to catch them if they fall or to help them and mentor.
So, I see there's these stages that we go through of learning. They stay, when we're young, we learn, and the world is opening up to us, and we grasp hold of the whole thing, and we want to embrace it. And then we get settled into a pattern of work, like if you're in a corporate situation, and then and this is what I found is that sometime in your 40s, people begin to have another transition point emerge for them. I mean, I saw it when working with scouts with my sons, is that 11 years old was one of those moments of transition from elementary school into middle school.
Right.
And those are the best ones to take on because they wanted the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, they wanted to go everywhere and do everything. And I've also found that men and women who are in their 40s begin to go through a similar transition, and so their sense of who they are as leaders is also going through that transition. What have you seen in your experience about kind of mid-career transitions where the opportunity to change your leadership style or leadership purpose is presented to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I could look at my own journey and then also the people that I've had the opportunity to work with. When we get in our 30s and 40s, I look at myself. I think when I was 40 years old, I was probably, when I think of physically and mentally and kind of professional competence, I was probably absolutely at the top of my game. I was wearing a Superman cape. I could do everything physically. I could probably do the work of 3 other people. And if they weren't doing it, I could take up the slack. Sharp as a tack, absolutely competent in my profession. But we age, and physically and mentally. And I think that there's a inflection point where a person should really start thinking about, okay, now's the time for me to start mentoring and empowering other people. And we all see that when we get promoted and we get in a higher position. You can't do it all yourself, but I think a lot of people have trouble letting go, maybe in their 40s. I used to do a program with Outward Bound. We did a lot of executive leadership programs, and we did a program for a very large international company. It was their manager to leader program. So they were taking general managers, men and women who were at the top of their game. Some of them were managing billion-dollar revenue companies, and they sent them out to Outward Bound, the wilderness, for, I think it was a short program. It was about a week, and we would take them out and try to help them discover what the company wanted is people to stop thinking of themselves as just managers and individual contributors, try to make that next step to executive, to be leaders of large organizations. And so a quick analogy, we used to take them rock climbing, and there's several roles on a rock face. One is the climber, obviously. One is the belayer, the person that is holding the rope and keeping them from falling. And one is kind of an observer. And we would ask them lots of metaphors, and Outward Bound would ask them, what in your job, where do you see yourself? And many of them would say, I'm the climber, I'm the person that's up there leading, I'm always up front, I'm showing everybody the way. Other people would say, no, I'm the belayer, I'm the person that steps back a little bit and provides a safety net, coaches, helps people find the route. And we would say, actually, it's not those. You're the person that's standing back, looking at the entire rock face, watching people climb and watch people belay. And that metaphor, and then ask them to make that, to apply that metaphor to their particular job, because so many of them are used to being up there, follow me, or telling people what route to take. But really that next step is to step back and let people find their own way, and keep an eye on the strategic picture, the overall environment, all the other things that you have to do when you work your way up in an organization. So I think that's a real important piece. Some of it comes naturally through promotion and more responsibility, but I think that we need to be aware of that and looking for that, and leaders need to help people make that transition to that next step.
And I guess it's really difficult when you, in a certain sense, maybe the Peter principle has found you, and you have really reached a level. You've reached that status level of this is really all I can do. I really am not equipped to go any further.
Right.
And so, but there's all these expectations that I need to go further. I mean, it's that quandary of who am I and what am I to do, and what is the impact that I'm supposed to have when I still have another 20 years or 25 years of work ahead of me. I think that's a real challenge for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think creating more leaders is really that's something that we should always be looking at, is creating the next generation, help people find their voice as a leader. It's funny, when I got out here to the civilian world, I was kind of sitting up in my retirement home and wasn't really doing much. And I said, I need to get down to the community and get involved. So I talked to someone and they said, well, you need to go get on the board of directors of some nonprofits and go take a community orientation program, and go join Rotary. And I just say Rotary because that's what I am, but join a civic organization. And so I'm 40, as I said, 40, 41 years old, and thought it was pretty hot stuff. And, I was a Marine, retired Marine. I could do anything. And I joined Rotary, and I was kind of sitting in the back of the room. And one of the old guys in Rotary called me up one night, just out of the blue. I didn't even know how to spell Rotary yet. I'd joined, I did, probably 3 weeks. He said, "Hey, John, there's this big service project we have come. I won't go into details, but it was a very big service project that Rotary was undertaking, and included lots of moving parts and lots of phone calls and coordination and working with different people." And he said, "I'd like you to take this on. I'm asking you to take this on." And I remember thinking, I don't even know I have no idea how to do this. I just came out of the Marine Corps. I don't know the county officials. I don't know the city government. I don't know all these nonprofits. But, and so he said, of course, being a good Marine, I saluted and I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll do that." Hung up the phone. I thought, goodness gracious, where do I start? But here I am, 41 years old, uh, you know, working professional, and he led. He put me in a position to learn, to struggle, to face the unknown, to deal with ambiguity, and that phone call really turned me from being a member of Rotary Club to being a Rotarian. Right.
Wow.
So I don't want to beat the Rotary drum too much. This is the organization that I'm in, but we could probably all think of times where somebody, that's the definition of adventure, right? You're not sure the outcomes, and you're not sure whether you can do it or not. But he knew I could do it, and so he empowered me and asked me to take that on.
Well, leaders, whatever the organization is, become the embodiment of the values and the purpose of that organization, and they lead by reminding people, this is who we are, this is our purpose, and this is what we're going to do, and this is how we measure our success. That's a major part of taking on something like that, and it's difficult when the organization has kind of lost touch with its values, and its purpose is to kind of survive. That's not really enough to kind of call people to servanthood and to service and to sacrifice and to participation and contribution. So I think that's something that everybody who's in their 40s really needs to go look for. I think your story is really an example to all of us about the importance of, okay, I'm doing the job over here, but I need to do something more. I need to step out of my comfort zone, and I need to go contribute, in this case, to my community in a way that really gives me something that I can look at for a longer period of time than maybe this job that may change in 2 months or 6 years or whatever it may be.
Yeah. You know, one of the greatest things a leader can do, I think, is to draw, you know, when you get lots of, if you're on a dry eraser board and you're trying to Venn diagram everything that's going on in an activity or organization, there's dots and stars and there's this and that, there's all these diagrams. The greatest thing a leader can do is draw a big circle around everything and put everything in context. You know, we just finished this last weekend, matter of fact, a huge fundraiser, annual fundraiser that I'm the event director for. Raises, you know, tens of thousands of dollars for local charity, but I'm the event director, and it's a bike ride. It's a road bike ride. So we get 1,000 riders from all over the Southeast, and we always have a big confirmation brief right before to bring everybody together and talk about the details and talk everything through, and have my whole club, you know, 50 people in front of me, and I get up there and everybody's wanting to talk about times and logistics and bicycles and vehicles and, you know, traffic control. And I threw the organizational mission up on the screen, and our values, as you said, and our purpose and our operating principles. And for 10 minutes, we just talked about that. Why are we here? What are we doing? What are the values that underpin our behaviors? And I think people were looking at their watches. When are we going to get to the details? And we did get to the details, but it's so important to draw that big circle around everything and ask that question. You know, why are we doing this? Which ultimately informs everything you do, right? The mission informs everything you do and can provide a real important lighthouse for folks without telling them what to do, right?
Right.
Give them the why and let them figure it out.
You know, I had a similar transition take place with me, and I would say that where I am today is because of this experience I had. This is 1999. And we had taken our family out to Jackson Hole, and we were at a dude ranch, and we were riding horses in there in that beautiful valley with the Grand Tetons. And we're out one afternoon, and we come around this curve, and they're the Tetons, and I hear a voice. I don't hear voices often, but when I do hear them, I listen. And the voice said, "It's time to stop talking about leadership and lead."
Mm.
And what came to me, what I interpreted that to mean was, whatever gets placed in front of me, I'm going to find a way to say yes to it. And two things began to happen right away. Within 6 months, 7 months, I found myself in the position of being the scoutmaster for my son's scout troop.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything about being a scoutmaster, didn't know much about scouts. And then there was a situation with a client, and there were these two women who were part of this group, and they had come back from their state conference, and they had heard this guy talk about video game violence, and I'm blanking on his name. It'll come to me in a second. And they were raving about how significant and passionate he was, and I said, well, why don't we invite him to come here? And out of that came this big event that took us a year to plan, that covered both Henderson County and Buncombe County, Asheville and Hendersonville, and we involved the sheriffs and involved ministers and city officials and people all over to talk about children and violence and video games. And you know, and it was just one of those things where I didn't do the work, really. I just was the catalyst for let's come together, let's go figure out how we're going to do this. I think that's something that everybody who's in their 40s has the opportunity to do. You've had, you know, in your case, 20 years of knowledge, experience, and all of a sudden you had the opportunity to go do something that, in a sense, transformed your life. I think this is really a great lesson for all of us, and it's a great story. And but what that leads us to is, okay, 20 more years down the road, we're hitting retirement age. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for people at that point in time when leadership is still an option for them? And what is it that beckons us to go do? I mean, I think I'm a little older than you, but it's not much. But I'm going to hit 70 in June, and I know that I've entered into a whole new stage of my life just in the last year. And it's has nothing to do with retirement, and it's nothing to do with slowing down. In fact, the pace is picking up. So I think this is a something that we who have been in the leadership world also now need to think more about, because I think there are a lot of people who are in our age, our generation, who are settling into putting their feet up on the front porch and kind of relaxing and coasting through whatever remains of their life.
Yeah. I think if we keep, I always try to keep service at the front of my, the forefront of my thoughts, and that notion of service can look like a lot of different things. The notion of service when you're a 30-year-old Boy Scout leader is going to look a lot more hands-on, a lot more physical, a lot more kind of rubber meets the road. And then I look at, I go back, I look at in Boy Scouts when I was a young boy, or maybe young leader, there's all these, 75, 80-year-old guys that kind of come along in the campouts, where they kind of sit around the fire, and you kind of wonder, what are those guys doing? They're not really doing anything. I'm out here pitching tents and cooking bacon and doing all the things. Those guys are serving, and they're guys and gals, serving, and they're serving in a different capacity, but they're serving. And so for most of us, it's hard to let go, right? It's hard to let go. For me, I know it's the physical things, to say, we were loading trailers last weekend, and I was watching this 30-year-old guy just pick up this stuff and throw it in the trailer, and I was just shaking my head going, man, I remember when I could do that, but that's okay. That's okay. And so I think if that service mindset stays in the forefront of our mind, the way you serve is going to morph over time as you age, and it's not like we're just losing things. We're not just losing physicality. We're gaining wisdom, right? And so that wisdom is something that you have, that one of my boss, well, she wasn't really my boss, co-worker when I was working at the college, she used a quote often. I don't know if she came up with it. I think it may be a well-used quote, but what you keep to yourself disappears. What you give away multiplies. I think that's really important for us old guys and old gals to remember, is if it's in your head and you're wondering whether or not you ought to share it, you probably should. One of my old bosses in the Marines said, if you ever look in the mirror and wonder whether or not you need a haircut, you probably do. And so if you're ever thinking, I wonder if I know the answer, or I've been through this experience before, I've experienced this before, sharing that will ensure that that's your legacy, right? Your legacy is empowering and teaching and mentoring other folks. And so that to me would be, if I were to say there's some guiding light, is, okay, how do I transfer this knowledge, or at least the opportunity for others to gain this knowledge? Whether or not they do is up to them, but and many times that is in the service of developing more leaders. There's no greater there's no greater service than a leader can do is develop more leaders, right? And so that's something I hope, and I'm glad we're having this conversation, because I'm doing a little self reflection myself. So when we close this, I'm going to say, okay, there's probably some things I probably ought to be doing that I need to walk my talk. There's probably some people
Well,
I
yeah.
interact with that can probably use a little more of what I know, and I should probably share some more.
I've come to the conclusion that I mean, basically we're talking about mentoring. A lot of this is talking about mentoring, but that what we really need to be talking about is mutual mentoring.
Hmm.
So when I've encountered these Gen Zers and these millennials, I basically say, listen, yeah, I've had a lot of experience, but you have too, and I want to learn from you as much as you want to learn from me. So how can we do that? I think that's really a very important kind of stance to take today.
Absolutely, yeah. Humility, right? Probably the least mentioned leadership trait,
Yeah.
but yeah, you only get old when you stop learning. Um, and
So
so,
so let's talk a little bit as we closed about the book that you and Sean did, and I'll link to the our interview last summer in the show notes, so it's so people can see that, and that was a fun thing. But here we are. I think what we're talking probably 10 months since 9, 10 months since it came out. So
right.
what have you discovered? What's the what have you learned? What's been surprising? What is it that feel like you need to do more of, less of?
Well, I think one thing that I've learned is if there's the best compliment that we've received about this work is there's nothing new in it. And I take that as a compliment because there's probably not a lot of new under the sun when it comes to leadership. I mean, it's an academic subject. It's social science. It's psychology. There's lots of stuff. There's studies, and you've seen them, that quantitative studies that that say these are leadership traits that if exhibited do influence folks. There's these leadership principles. Um, you could probably pick the top 10 leadership principles, and there's not much disagreement across the board. So there's nothing new. So what we really tried to focus on is what's best, and we just we both have some academic grounding, but it's not an academic book. We really mined our personal experience and did a lot of conversations between ourselves and others, and just tried to focus in the core fundamentals, because I think if anything is lacking, is a focus on the fundamentals. The newest shiny object, as with all things, is rarely, uh, in some cases, but is rarely the way to go. Usually sticking to the basics. And so when I say basics, I'm not saying easy, but or simple, but the fundamentals: service orientation, mission focus, putting others before yourself, um, are really, the core of the core of the core of our message. And it really resonates, Ed. I mean, it's amazing. We work with, as you do, we work with junior level executives, mid-level managers, general managers, executives, and people eat it up. And I say eat it up in a good way. There is a voracious appetite for learning about leadership. Um, the programs we do are usually with cross-functional cohorts, bringing people together to get a common vocabulary and a common perspective on leadership across the organization, which can be immensely helpful for folks, not only for their own leadership development, but holding each other accountable. Um, Here's what we expect at this place. This is what we expect of our leaders. This is what people expect of me as a leader. And for an organization, vertically and horizontally, to get that vocabulary and that common understanding can be immensely helpful in an organization. And that's something that's really, we really didn't know it was going to come out of the book. Uh, The content of the book is good, but I think just the process of going through the content and the conversations that happen among people, cross functions and cross geographical centers, can be immensely helpful to people. Rarely do we just talk about leadership. We talk a lot about management. Those are the things that weigh on us every day. But to take a breath and step back and talk about leadership as a body as a function in an organization can be immensely helpful.
You know, I've read a lot of leadership books, and a lot of them are very derivative of previous leadership books. And you say that there's nothing new in it, but I think it's a very relevant book. I think, and I said, a year ago that I thought it was one of the finest books on leadership I've ever read. And I think it may be the finest one produced during this century. I've said that, of course, to embarrass you guys, but also to recognize that you've done something of real worth. And so I think that's important. And you really forced me to address a blind spot in my own thinking. And I haven't said this to Sean, but I'm saying it to you. And it's that in my little model of the circle of impact, I have values, purpose, vision, and impact is the four connecting words. And I have been treating purpose and mission as kind of interchangeable, as if they were the same. And after reading your book, I realized they're not the same. That purpose is a reflection of the bringing together of all your values to have a singular vision or a singular purpose for why I am this person.
Mm-hmm.
Mission is, what am I going to do with that purpose in the world?
Right.
And that distinction to me is really important, because those two words get thrown around as the same, but I don't think they are the same. And the more I've thought about it, the more significant I think this book is, because I think a lot of people are focused on purpose. I get that a lot, but I don't see a lot of people having a sense of mission to take that purpose somewhere to achieve something or to contribute something or to have an impact. So I just celebrate this idea of being on mission as really a significant message for our time. Whether you're a 21-year-old, a 41-year-old, a 61-year-old, a 70-year-old, it doesn't matter. It really has relevance to who you are at any stage of your life.
Well, thanks. And I appreciate what you said, because I'm the same way. I think we constantly need to be questioning, we all have this Venn diagram of leadership in our mind. We always need to be questioning that. We have ours. I've read yours and appreciate it, but it's the questioning and the perplexity is where we grow, right? And so I think that's really important. It's always questioning, always open to new ways to look. It's the process, not the product, right? It's building those neural strands in your brain and questioning and reconsidering and being open to change and open to new ideas. So that's important.
It is.
Keep learning.
Well, John, thank you for coming on. We'll get the contact information from you to put in the show notes, so people want to get in touch with you, find your book, ask you to coach them or come give a speech or take them on a hike. And sorry we didn't have enough time to go into this big hike that you just did on your solo hike that you just
No
did.
worries.
Maybe another time, but
Yeah.
Thank you for who you are and what you've given to the world. And everyone, thank you for listening. Please sign up, subscribe, and hit the like button so that we know that you appreciated what you heard today. But even more so, ask a question or contribute a comment so that the conversation that we have through these podcast episodes really can matter to you and to me and the guest, but also to other people who will see your comment and say, oh, I haven't thought about that. That's a really great thing. And maybe they'll want to talk to you. So let's make this a conversation, because it's a conversation that's going to have a benefit to all of us, wherever we live in this world, in our local communities. So thank you, John. We'll see
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate
Thank you, everyone. And thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.